So we have seen that if we create an EC2 instance in a private subnet, we cannot SSH into it. But typically in production environment, almost all the EC2 instances would be in private subnet. Not only in production, maybe in dev and QA also. As a best practice, the servers should be in private subnet only. So if that is the case and you have to do some development, have to run some codes in the EC2 instance, how do you do it? That's where the concept of Bastion Host comes into picture. It's a very simple concept. So basically what we do is that we use the EC2 instance in the public subnet to SSH into the EC2 instance in the private subnet. And it looks something like this. We have this EC2 instance in the public subnet and we have an EC2 instance in the private subnet. What we do is that we first SSH into the EC2 instance in the public subnet, and from that EC2 instance we SSH into the EC2 instance in the private subnet. And this EC2 instance in the public subnet is called a Bastion host. So this is how we log in or SSH into any of the EC2 instances that we have in the private subnet. One more very important thing to remember is that to SSH into the EC2 instance in a private subnet, we need the private key in the EC2 instance of the public subnet. So without the private key, we cannot SSH into this particular EC2 instance. And this is the same private key that we download while creating the key pair. The PEM file that I have in my local machine, that exact same PEM file should be there in the EC2 instance of public subnet. So how do we do it? We copy this private key or the PEM file from our local machine to the EC2 instance in the public subnet, and from there we SSH into the EC2 instance in the private subnet. Let me show you that. So I have these two EC2 instances running. One is in the public subnet and one is in the private subnet. So this is the public EC2 instance in the public subnet, and this is the private IP address, and then this is the EC2 instance in the private subnet. So just to show you that this actually is in a private subnet, let me try to SSH into this particular EC2 instance. And I have created both of these EC2 instance using the same key pair, which is 3IAM appendix 1 EC2 key pair PEM. So if I do ssh-i, and this is the IP address of the EC2 instance in the private subnet. Public IP address, not private IP address. So as you can see, I cannot log into it. So after some time, it will give operation timed out error. So let me anyway cancel this. Now what I have to do is that I'll have to copy the PEM file, which is 3IAM appendix A1 EC2 key pair, to the EC2 instance in the public subnet. And from Linux machines, the command is this is the command. So scp, which is secure copy, with the same file, with the same key pair, and I want to copy the key pair file only using EC2 user, and this is the IP address or public IP address of the EC2 instance in the public subnet, and colon followed by /home/EC2 user, which is basically the directory where we want to copy this file in, and type yes. So now this file or this PEM file should be copied into the EC2 instance of the public subnet. So as you can see, the file has been copied. So now let me SSH into the EC2 instance, which is there in the public subnet. So I'm logged into the EC2 instance in the public subnet, and if I do ls-l, I can see that the PEM file has been copied to this particular EC2 instance. Now from here, I'll run the same command ssh-i followed by this PEM file EC2 user @ now which IP address should I use of the EC2 instance? Should I use the public IP address or should I use the private IP address? Now if I use public IP address, what would happen? That the traffic would go out of this EC2 instance, hit internet, and then will try to come back to that particular EC2 instance which is there in the private subnet. But we already know that there is no connectivity from internet to that EC2 instance. So if we use public subnet, the result would be the same. It will not work. Now So we'll have to use the private IP address. So now if we use the private IP address, I should be able to SSH into the EC2 instance which is there in private subnet. So as you can see, I'm inside of that EC2 instance, which is 17.11.187 and 17.11.187. So which is basically the EC2 instance in the private subnet. And this is what a Bastion host is, and this is how Bastion host works.